it's kind of funny is that I wound up doing a lot of study on the whole Martian thing because a friend of mine over in the UAE and I we were actually proposing VR habitats for for people in Mars colonies and that sort of thing, because you're going to wind up in these relatively cramped quarters, or you're going to be on a ship for 2 years and that sort of thing, and you need a way to feel like you're not in a can. So this is one really good psychological use for VR.
Artist, writer, and curator Patrick Lichty returns to the Plutopia podcast as we explore the future. We do a deep dive into Web3, crypto, bad actors on the internet, meta and the Metaverse, Second Life, science fiction, and life on Mars.
Yeah, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah, and that's more unevenly distributed in some parts than others.
The future is, from one perspective, a person could look at what's happening in the world and say that one possible future, some fear its inevitability, is that authoritarians will take control throughout the world, and
Right.
that the project of democracy will be pretty much dead. And then there's other people who are, working in various ways to sustain democracy. There's some stuff that's happening in the so-called Web3, the idea of decentralization. The decentralization will undermine authoritarian attempts. I'm not sure that, I don't really completely understand how the decentralization strategies work. For instance, with a DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization.
Okay.
I kind of understand what that is, a decentralized organization, and I've been part of a decentralized organization before.
Sure.
But I'm not really sure I understand exactly how it works.
Well,
especially at scale.
Yeah, maybe we can go down a little bit, but what happens is that I think about 3 points. I really, really, really love old, telecommunications art. There was a guy named Robert Adrian who used to use old, and actually I still use these things, old ham radio video transceivers called slow scan. And I still have a stack of these things, and I use this old decrepit stuff to make weird video art. But what he said is, when you get two people online talking together, and he said this somewhere between 1978 and 1971, I forget the exact year. I'd have to look at the essay, but I think probably about 81, I think. And he says, get two people online, communicating, that sort of thing. And then there was a virtual space there you go. And that's that emerges between those two people. And on one hand, between artists, we've always thought that it would be this great free space. And I'll go over to our friend JP Barlow in just a second. And so what happened is that but what Adrian said is that it would almost inevitably collapse back into the superstructure, because the internet was created by DARPA, and we wind up having capital, basically wanting to leverage whatever it can. And so what I was listening to John Perry Barlow talk. He did do the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, and talking about that this is a new free space online that doesn't that is that is autonomous and does not, put itself to any, existing, nation state or corporation and whatnot. And although I love that piece, it sounded oddly similar to, the Web3 and crypto crowd and that sort of thing. And there was sort of like saying, guess what? We don't have to deal with that. And, we don't, this is a new space where we can be free. And then I kind of go back to Adrian and thinking of the fact that, it seems, now that, some of the traditional forces, that's, some of our cyber utopianism, kind of, is pushing against are some of the things that, swallow the stuff up as fast as, we generate it.
It sounds like people who originally espoused the free and open internet didn't expect the kind of people to be showing up that we're seeing now, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and they're online.
Yeah. I think actually, though, we should have known better, because I know that at the time, say in 1992, 93, when we were doing Fringeware,
Yeah.
what we were saying is throughout the world and across America, especially, we were kind of US centric at the time. So we'd say across America, there are people in every little town and village who really don't feel like they fit, and they feel like they're sort of on the fringes of things, and they can find each other on the internet, which is kind of what happened. But what we didn't really think about is that some of those people might have malicious intent.
Yeah, it's, so I mean, on one hand, and what I'm about to say, I'm making a false metaphor, and what I'm about to say, but I mean, I used to be for a long time part of that an activist group called the Yes Men that used to, and they're still around, but I'm just, I'm not active with them currently at the moment. And what happens is that going and doing corporate pranks and doppelganging and things like that. And so the thing is that kind of how Picasso used to say, artists are liars who expose the truth, and that sort of thing. Or in other words, kind of like Jonathan Swift in the Model's Proposal. In other words, he put that out saying, hey, guess what? We can take care of the potato famine, by eating the children of the Irish. It's like this is expected to be pulled out, But you have people out there who are talking about stuff that they don't want you to call them out. They want you to believe them, and in other words, and it's a little interesting, so, and and before that there was that guy who kind of like, who punked PBS and that sort of thing, kind of did a Yes Men like stuff, but on the right side, it's like, wait a second. But the thing is that it's there you go. And they, so the whole thing is that it's a tool, a tool can be the use of a tool can be shaped by the intent of its user. And sometimes I kind of say about, well, and I'm also doing a little double entendre on tool.
Well, speaking of tools, who would have guessed that Donald Trump would have his own social media site? I mean, I didn't see that coming. I should have, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Well, they've done real well with it too, haven't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, well, I'm there, you know what's interesting? There are two things. It's like there's a buddy of mine, Ben Grosser, who's a artist out of Champaign, Urbana. He started a social media network in which you only have 100 posts called Minus. That's it. 100 posts. After that, you're done. And so maybe that's the way things ought to be.
Term limiting there.
Yeah, there's Ben.
There
that's his new place, platform, Sweet Talk, and he's quite prolific. And actually, that's it.
There's Minus.
Yep. What if a social network, only gave you 100 posts? That's it. And you can sign up, you get 100 posts, and after that, kicks you off.
Well, speaking of social networks, a lot of it's been made just this week about a lot of criticism of the Zuckerberg attempt at turning us all into the metaverse, and how that has not really panned out in the way that he claimed it was going to.
Oh, yeah.
Is the
Yeah, in
metaverse
fact,
coming?
they were saying that he went way too far down the path of the metaverse because he had sycophants around who were saying, "Oh, this is going to be great. It's going to work," And anybody who's sort of got some VR and some tech experience could see that there would be some adoption, but it's not going to be widespread adoption of something like that.
No. That's like that. I was talking to a guy who was in this whole Web3 and Metaverse thing, and I just said, and I'm literally, I go to him and I say, "Hey," I said, he goes, "Who's this for?" He says, "Everybody." And it's like, okay, well, you're thinking that, this is maybe we wind up with there's a guy named, I think, Keiichi Matsuda, who did a video art piece I wrote called Hyper Reality, about this Colombian woman, who's like wearing like Apple AR glasses, and she's like constantly, having to play like little games, and her jobber, calls her up and that sort of thing, and she does little gigs. But and I wonder sometimes whether that's kind of like what the what Web3 the metaverse wants to be, in other words, kind of this overlay, this capitalistic overlay between us and reality. But it's interesting is that Stevenson wrote about that in 95, and here we are. It's like Second Life was that online virtual world was calling itself the metaverse in 2005. That's kind of interesting. 10 years.
Yeah, Neil's got his own project too.
What's that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And so it's
I'm trying to remember what the name of it is.
It's but you know what I asked this guy?
Lamina 1.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you know what I asked this Web3 guy? I said, you want this to be for everybody, right? I said, okay, guess what? I got a guy who is a fish farmer in Bangladesh. How about him? And he said, I'll have to get back on you. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Well, it's interesting. My observation of throughout the history of the internet as we have it now, and as we've had it for, since it's really evolved to like fairly mass adoption, that people wanted light tools that they could control pretty well and that were pretty accessible. Yeah. So instead of VR catching on in a big way, what caught on in a big way was text messaging.
Sure.
Text messaging became like much bigger than so many other things. Anything that it's not complicated, it's easy to use, it has a great utility.
Yep.
And I don't believe that anything that's bulky or has a lot of weight to it or a lot of bloat to it is going to work. And I don't know of any other way to do VR, really.
No. And
it tends to be bloated.
Yeah, it's
something that's
taken
really
a lot
interesting.
just to get a usable headset. And they've tried so many ones, and a lot of them are just nasty. I've tried them, and it walked away or crawled away with a headache.
Yeah, I mean, they will make you dizzy. They'll give you a headache.
Yeah.
I mean, it's physically problematic, and I don't really believe that people want to spend significant time within a headset or inside of a headset, inside of a virtual reality. Now, that's not the way Second Life was. It was on a screen, and it was kind of a virtual reality. But Second Life, as good as it was, and as creative and useful as it was for so many people, it never had huge adoption.
You know what's interesting? It still has a steady state of 30,000.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the old thing about suppose they gave a war and no one showed up, but suppose they gave a metaverse and no one showed up. And that's what's happening, for Meta.
Well, did you see that? Did you see that article? I mean, I figured that there's a little bit of distortion in it, but they make a really interesting metaphor about is that, that NFT kind of like version of Second Life for crypto bros called Decentraland and that sort of thing. And they said there was an article that was talking about at one point going on and on this millions of dollars platform. When they went on, there was 38 people online. And I don't know whether that has a bit of distortion to it. I mean, it seems a little bit low for me, but I think it makes a good metaphor. In other words, and then, I think we're all familiar with, kind of like the tech sector saying, so, well, it's just early days now, and it's kind of funny that sometimes you get a Second Lifer that says, well, the technology is still in its adolescence. I'm saying, hey, this stuff's 17 years old. I mean, come on, you should wind up, your avatar should have virtual arthritis by now.
Well, an interesting related development, FTX, the crypto guys. Yeah. And did anyone see that go? I saw that coming, but how do we keep getting involved in these kind of, ridiculous Ponzi schemes?
Well, for a while, there's a lot of people making a lot of money, and then, they're showing themselves as examples of, people who are, successful with little effort and that sort of thing, and saying that you can do it too. And for a little while, you can do it, but then the thing is that, as that pyramid builds, that door slams shut, and you got all those people, who were, clambering up to try to, get into the sun and that sort of thing. And really all they're doing is, funding these guys. There was another theory that I wound up hearing that I kind of believe is that when they saw Bitcoin and Ethereum, Bitcoin going up into the 40s, and well, it was getting up into the 30s and so on. This is when the whole NFT thing started getting really big and that sort of thing. Yeah. And so one theory is that, basically you wind up with all this valuation. It gets so big that the market cap that's in the system can't support the whole thing if it gets liquidated. And so you wind up with this whole NFT market that emerges to try to crystallize some of that value, without collapsing the entire system.
Yeah, eventually the waiter shows up with the bill, and someone's going to have to pay the tab.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a weird thing. I mean, cryptocurrency and even NFTs are basically selling unique hashes, right? That's kind of what you're doing. You're just selling a unique identifier, or you're selling a unique piece of code. And, you know, where cryptocurrency, where it came from a thought, an idea of having a medium of exchange, but it really did not become a medium of exchange. It became a medium of investment. I mean, a thing that you invest in. And I don't think that's sustainable.
No.
I don't see how it's sustainable, especially if, I mean, you got to think about this. What if we don't have electricity?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with your cryptocurrency then? It completely depends on a fairly robust electrical net grid, you know, to support it.
Well, I mean, now this starts getting into some really interesting things. Is networked culture sustainable?
I mean, it is
there.
It's conditionally sustainable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, under certain conditions it's sustainable, but it's not under other conditions sustainable at all.
No. I mean, you can't have. I mean, it's interesting now with you've got crypto going over from proof of work to proof of stake, you know, and Bitcoin hasn't done that yet, but Ethereum just did. And, you know, that was probably like, you know, taking Finland offline, you know, and that sort of thing. But the thing is that, you know, in the long run, is that going to be enough?
It's sort of like the thing with water. I mean, so I'm living in a city where at the moment water is cheap and readily available.
Sure.
And we have pretty good water, right?
Yeah.
But we learned a year or so ago when we had no water, what it feels like to suddenly be cut off from that. And what we know, or what planners will know anyway, is that you can't just infinitely build out and add more population. I mean, more and more people keep moving to this area, but the water tables are such that you can't sustain unlimited growth.
No.
So the question is, what do you do about that? If you continue to have people moving in, I mean, we've had a steady flow of people moving into Texas. I think maybe it's slowed down partly because Texas has become politically toxic, and we have people who want to move away from Texas now. But this is a problem, and the problem of scaling also applies to electrical grids and to any resource, really. Any resource that you have can scale only so much, but can't scale infinitely. Yeah. And we tend not to take that into account. In science fiction, the earlier, more techno-utopian science fiction especially didn't take that into account so well.
No. I mean, it's like, you know, like Frank Herbert's, you know, you just basically.
He took it into account.
He took it into account, yeah. And, you know, there were billions upon billions of people, you know, throughout the Imperium and that sort of thing. But, you know, they just kept going, you know, taking the mysterious Holtzman Drive and, you know, going out to wherever and populating someplace and that sort of thing. There were enough planets, you know, that could do that, you know, but, you know, right now, as they say, there isn't any planet B.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, this gets us to the thing about science fiction.
Yeah. So,
which is, I mean, my thing about science fiction has been that we have come to believe things that are not necessarily real because we have seen them so often in various forms of science fiction. They've been reflected so many times as realities that we have come to believe wholeheartedly that they might exist or could exist. One of these is time travel. I think that's one that is, you know, very unlikely. But another one is this idea that, when we fill up, when we've got too many people for the Earth, we'll just fly into space. We'll move to Mars. We'll start colonizing other planets. And we don't know that that's possible.
Well,
we don't
Elon
even know
thinks
that
it
we can
is.
make the trips. Yeah, but you know, Elon's a loon.
Well, it's kind of funny is that I wound up doing a lot of study on the whole Martian thing, because a friend of mine over in the UAE and I, we were actually proposing VR habitats for, you know, for people, you know, in Mars colonies and that sort of thing, because you're going to wind up in these, you know, relatively cramped quarters, you know, or you're going to be on a ship for 2 years and that sort of thing, and you need a way to feel like you're not, you know, in a can. You know, so this is one really good psychological use for VR, you know. And so it's like but wound up doing a whole bunch of studies on Mars and that sort of thing. I think, what is it? It's like, you know, 1/6, you know, 1/6 of the gravitational pull. Doesn't have a liquid center, so it, you know, it doesn't have a strong magnetosphere, which means basically all of the cosmic rays come in and bake you. And you know, you're only going to have an atmosphere 1/6 as thick, you know, as United. As the Earth at best. So the thing is that you know. You know, I think we're getting sold a bill of goods on Mars. I mean, Mars is interesting. I mean, the moon is interesting. I think, you know, but you know, it's I think this whole idea that Musk has, you know, that's based on this, let's go and hook into this thing, this long-termism thing, and you know, effective altruism thing. You know, basically talking about doing whatever is necessary for the long-term existence of the human species.
I get the feeling that Musk is not
activism.
going to actually do that himself. It's a good way for him to make more money.
He's going to spend the rest of his life trying to make Twitter work.
Good luck on that. But you know, if he really wants people to work and live on Mars, he should go to that. Is the original biodome still in existence? Lock him in a biodome for a while and see how he enjoys that.
Yeah. That'd be
Biosphere 2.
Biosphere 2. That's it.
I think it still exists, but I don't think it's being used in quite the same way as it was.
Yeah.
You can visit Biosphere 2.
Yeah. I mean,
oh, here we go. I found Biosphere 2. This was a pretty cool project.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The only problem with it is that had a lot of human beings involved, and that's always what
I know. We just
that stirs it up every time.
Yeah. I mean, actually, you know, to be perfectly honest, I mean, from what I knew about it and that sort of thing, I think their biggest issue is that the amount of sheer detail, you know, I mean, just the sheer diversity in an actual biosphere, you know, on Earth is just, you know, so minute and that sort of thing. It's really hard to duplicate. And then the other thing is that do you think that maybe they just didn't have a big enough scale?
What, for a biosphere?
Yeah, in other words, like to support that number of human beings. In other words, in a balanced way.
I don't recall the story there, but it seems like they had management issues.
Yeah.
And apparently the expectations didn't match up with the actual technology they had at their disposal. I mean, they really couldn't do all the things they needed to do to exist in the dome. Not for an extended period of time. It'd be great for a couple of weeks.
There you go. Exactly. I think they were starting to get low on oxygen and stuff like that. So, but what I think is really interesting these days is, there's, like with AI and, all these things, I do a lot of, I don't necessarily want to get it. I think maybe AI and art might be a really good thing for another thing, but maybe not today, because I think that's a little bit long. But what I think's really interesting is it seems like so many things are going from science fiction to reality. And it was like talking from, the metaverse, it's like within 20 years, in other words, it's like, what's an iPad? It's basically, the pad from Star Trek The Next Generation, sliding doors, the original Star Trek, and that sort of thing. All these things are under like 20, 30, 40 years. And our colleague Bruce Sterling was working with Salvatore Iaconese and his partner Oriana Persico out in Italy with the Near Future Design Institute. And I think that made a very good point. In other words, the idea is that maybe science fiction, has collapsed into near future speculation. What do you
I
guys
don't
think?
know. I'm a little bit at a loss here myself because I haven't been reading so much recent science fiction.
That's true.
But there's a whole new generation of authors out there that I'm pretty unfamiliar with, and they're diverse. They're diverse. They're gender diverse, and they're racially diverse, and they're writing some pretty amazing stuff. I mean, there's categories of science fiction or subgenres of science fiction that are pretty new and vital and vibrant. And I haven't been reading in those, and it's sort of like on my list of I should be reading more science fiction. Thinking about Afrofuturism, which is a term that Mark Deary coined, but it's become a thing in science fiction, for instance. So I don't really know what's happening in science fiction now. And I think that, if Bruce will look at it through sort of the lens he has. I don't know whether he still reads a lot of science fiction or even hangs with a lot of science fiction people. I know that he has really been interested in design and futurism and that sort of thing. And I don't know. So what I'm basically saying is that I should read more science fiction, and probably all of us should.
I mean, I hear some of the couple notes. I mean, I hear there's some great stuff coming out of China, and that sort of thing, which kind of blew my mind a little bit. And there's some stuff out of Iran actually, which is that not a lot of it's translated. But you remember that Electronic Frontier Foundation party when John Perry was still alive, and there was that panel that I think John Perry and Bruce and I think Cory Doctorow and that sort of thing, and there's one point where Bruce is just kind of going, it's like, what, this isn't the future I wrote about. And I mean, I think this
isn't the dystopia I wrote about.
This isn't the dystopia that I wrote about. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of like the tying phrases for this kind of this whole discussion. In other words, it's like the people who wrote the cyberpunk dystopias and that sort of thing that weren't even remotely prepared for what's going on today.
Are we living in a dystopia?
Well, you know what? It's I call it an atopia. In other words, it's
no
like
utopia at all.
It's
a Plutopia.
It is.
Yeah, we've got one of those.
Yeah. Well, in other words, we have a reality. It is. Yeah, I'm just kind of like an atopia is sort of like saying it's not necessarily utopia or dystopia. In other words, it is what it is, but it's the thing is like the functioning and dysfunctioning. Let's go back to, William Gibson's things, like it's unevenly distributed.
It's
You
true.
know,
But I'm considering, so I and most of the people I'm aware of, with exceptions, homeless
yeah,
people, that sort of
sure.
thing. But I got a roof over my head. I have carefully balanced temperature all day, every day, and all night.
Yeah.
I have all the food I could ever hope to eat. In fact, some pretty great food available to me. I have a car to tool around in. And I mean, from what I can see, people are living pretty well right now.
Well,
At the same time, I hear people talk about having like a great dissatisfaction with the way things are. And I keep wondering, what is there to be dissatisfied about? Things have been going pretty well for us.
yeah, I'd say, in regards to America, you're seeing things, where the general, quality of life, hasn't improved as much, or is kind of flat compared to post-war. I mean, I think that's kind of what people are seeing. In other words, they're seeing possibly, a slower improvement, or,
But has it got worse?
You know what? Yeah. You know what? I think a lot of that is perception, but I'll tell you something, is that after living in Asia for 6 years, there's a big chunk of the world, that isn't living anything like we are.
Oh yeah. And I should clarify, when I said all that stuff, I was talking about how things are really pretty good in America.
Yeah.
And how I don't understand
Americans.
why Americans have anything to complain about. But other parts of the world there's places that are just terrible. I mean, Haiti.
Yeah, there are some
Oh,
Americans that probably do have something to complain about, because there's still a lot of inequities in,
yes.
depending on who you are and where you're from and where you're living. You could be living well, or you could be, living in a cardboard box under the freeway.
Well, I did mention homeless people, and there's relative issues, and there's people who are not being treated fairly at all.
Right.
And there's actually, inequality, that's kind of part of the debate now, isn't it? I mean, it's like social equality is what the left is about. And on the right, they favor hierarchies. That, as I understand it, those are significant differentiating factors between the left and the right. Social equality on one hand, hierarchy on the other hand. And we see that hierarchical thinking, we see the right taking a lot of power right now. And we also know that people who are not white, I could have said people of color, or I could have said blacks, whatever. I don't know what terms are acceptable anymore, but people who are not white are not necessarily treated in the same way as people who are white.
They definitely are not. Yeah. And the other thing is that since I was, shall we say, since we were all younger, the, class inequity has, exploded. Like, your CEO, might make would, back in the 60s or something like that, maybe make 50 times more than, the guy on the floor, but now he's making 400, or like Musk making maybe like 5,000 times, 50,000 times more, in other words, like there's the class distribution, towards the top has just kind of gone haywire.
How did Elon Musk become the richest man in the world, I wonder?
Well, I mean, it sure didn't hurt that his parents had an emerald mine.
Oh, I guess you're right.
Uh-huh. And then, he did a couple of sweet deals on a couple major internet companies, and that
The
sort of
interesting
thing.
thing about Musk, from what I've been able to gather, is that he never really created any of the things that made him wealthy.
Neither
He
did
was,
Edison.
huh?
And even same for Edison.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I guess he's sort of like Edison,
Yeah,
and
which
about as
which is
nice.
which is ironic because he owns Tesla, which
Yeah.
he didn't create.
And I wouldn't put it past him to go out and kill an elephant with AC current the way Edison did.
Oh my Lord. Yeah,
Some
for
of these
sure.
like wealthy guys who were supposedly men of genius were certainly not good guys, and they were not good to people who worked for them. Musk has that reputation. Bezos has that reputation. A lot of these guys have the reputation for they're kind of like standing on the backs of the people who worked for
Yeah.
them.
You know what? Yeah, what's kind of funny is that what I sometimes wonder about whether Gates deserves as much flack as he gets.
Yeah, I think he's been a better guy. It's interesting. Bezos said the other day that he's going to give away his wealth. And he went for quite a long time without
Well,
making that
that's
gesture.
well, I mean, that's the other argument that goes with long-termism. In other words, in other earn to give. But the thing is that's almost feudalist. In other words, that's non-democratic. In other words, I'm not using the right term, but feudalist. But in other words, the idea is the matter that you become you become an oligarch, so that you can have this single vision towards the betterment of society, rather than have it coming out of the will of the people, or the will of the
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
and
What's your opposition to long-termism? Why are you opposed to long-termism? I mean, my understanding of long-termism is it just means, sort of giving priority to long-term effects. So, for instance, climate change really we need to be thinking long-term.
Well, the thing is that if you get into the reading on it and that sort of thing, it's about how they do it. In other words, as part of it is like this, is this, is that it gets done by the oligarchs, and the other point is that it's a lot of the philosophy around it is basically having to do with what the value proposition of the human being has to society, and and that dictates their viability as a as a valuable person to the species. And this starts, there are subsets within this group that starts talking about about eugenics, and the other idea of there's kind of a post-human branch talking about the idea of saying, okay, we may have 10 billion people, but then the other thing is that what we need to do is we need to have all of these AIs that go out into the universe, and we might have 50 quadrillion virtual people in cybernetic environments, living happy lives and that sort of thing, while you've got the legacy flesh still back on Earth and that sort of thing.
You got me thinking about, I saw a movie called Don't Worry, Darling.
Yeah,
if you've seen that. That's about people living in a virtual reality. I mean, that's a spoiler kind of, and I probably shouldn't say that, but that's what it's really about.
Maybe WandaVision.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that, and then and I don't think necessarily the Matrix is like this, but it's just but what I think is interesting is that when you get into the whole idea of long-termism, on surface, it looks like, we're going to think about, the long-term viability of humanity as a species. But the thing is what's really interesting is that when you start digging into, how they're going to go about it, that's where it gets, that's where you find that's where you open up the ointment. You find a bunch of flies in there.
Yeah, the other thing that this makes me think about is Doug Rushkoff's new book, The Survival of the Richest.
Well, that's related.
And it's really just about how wealthy people are sort of building out their safety environments to survive the apocalypse, whatever that apocalypse might be.
Yeah, I think a couple of things is that, on one hand is that there's a guy, Nathan Schaefer, who actually runs a comic book. He got a Creative Capital grant, and he has a graphic novel company and that sort of thing, who works with indigenous peoples up in the Northwest called Fish Head Soup. And, a lot of his stuff is Anglo and indigenous, stuff about climate change, which I think is really interesting. And then, and I guess what I was getting at is that, what's the discussion has been is the idea that, once you have with an increase of education, and there's discussion of what education is and whose education, et cetera, and that's valid. But the thing is that, in other words, wiser people tend to have less children. And that's probably a real lightning rod, thing. But in other words, it's like, you see people in more developed countries, and they tend to have less children, and that's probably a lightning rod discussion. But what's interesting is that that's basically been the argument for, population control, that it'd happen on its own. But we'll see. Malthus still has a point.
Well, we see a lot of the right wing here in this country saying that we need to have more children. They don't want to have any abortions, and they want to increase the number, especially the number of Republican children, I guess.
Of course.
Well, I don't know. I wonder about that. Yeah. If they really want to have more kids, just let them come across the border.
Wrong color.
Oh my.
It got really quiet there for a minute.
Yeah, no. But it's because you spoke truth.
We're down to 1 minute. You got any last thoughts?
Man, I think we hit a lot of notes. I hope that people were at least somewhat amused. It wasn't always funny, but I hope it was at least thought provoking.
Everybody knows that we're crazy.
Future's lumpy.
Yep. Like gravy, lumpy gravy.
No, gravy's wavy.
Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Always.
All right. Okay. We'll see you the next time.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.